Kevin Franke, the estranged husband of mommy vlogger turned criminal child abuser Ruby Franke, has just filed a brand new lawsuit against Ruby's co-defendant Jodi Hildebrandt. We break down the ins and outs of this new suit. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, we have an update for you in the Ruby Franke case. So Kevin Franke, the estranged husband of Ruby, the once popular YouTuber turned child abuser, has now filed a lawsuit against Jodi Hildebrandt, Ruby's co-defendant. Now, as you may recall, Ruby and Jodi, they both pleaded guilty to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse in Utah for what they did to Ruby's 2 youngest children. Children that were staying with Jodi at her residence back in the summer of 2023. Remember, they were physically, emotionally, mentally abused. It was absolutely sickening. Ruby's youngest son was able to escape Jodi's house through a window, run to a neighbor, get them to call 911. Both women were arrested. And after they pled guilty, they were each sentenced to 4 consecutive terms. Now, in Utah, the sentence is not determined by the judge, but the Board of Pardons and Paroles. So basically, if you do the math and you look at the sentencing guidelines and some of the restrictions, you're basically looking at potentially 4 to 30 years in prison for each of them. And what made this so twisted, and what we learned during the course of this case, is that Ruby had joined Jodi in the Connections organization, this life coaching program, that Jodi was a licensed mental health counselor, that Ruby was listed as a mental fitness trainer. And we have dedicated numerous sidebars to this case since it broke in August of 2023. And we did a full in-depth breakdown a few weeks ago of all of this new evidence that was released: jailhouse phone calls, body cam footage, interrogation tapes, provided a lot of insight into the players in this story. And that included Kevin Franke in particular. You see, through the footage and the audio tapes, you come to learn that Ruby and Kevin, they had separated. He claimed this was due to the influence of Jodi on Ruby. He agreed to live separately from Ruby and the kids because he was told that would be best. He didn't know what was going on with Ruby or the kids. That's what he claims. And in fact, he claims that he was shocked to learn that Ruby and his kids were staying with Jodi, and he was even more shocked to learn about this abuse. Now, let's not forget, Ruby and Kevin, they were in the spotlight for years. They had started the popular 8 Passengers YouTube channel back in 2015. It documented the lives of them and their 6 children. It became quite controversial. Some of the parenting techniques came into question. And Kevin himself has received a lot of criticism online about the videos, but also how could he not know what was happening with his family. But I think the more you dig deeper into this case and you understand the power dynamics and kind of this warped world they were living in, you get a better understanding of, I don't want to use the word brainwashing, but in a way that's almost what it is. But anyway, you fast forward and Kevin is filed for divorce from Ruby, our understanding, actively fighting to regain custody of his kids. And he has put a lot of the blame on this on Jodi. In fact, I remember during the sentencing hearing, you actually see Kevin Franke nodding in court as Jodi's manipulation is being described. So with that in mind, Kevin has filed a lawsuit against Jodi Hildebrandt, and it was filed on his behalf by his attorney, Randy Kester, who we've interviewed here on Sidebar and on Law&Crime. So with that in mind, let's break this suit down, and let me just first say to you, I am not surprised that we are seeing this lawsuit. Why? A, Kevin had already, months ago, filed a motion seeking restitution from Jodi Hildebrandt in connection with the ongoing mental health treatment for his children after what Jodi did. In fact, the court ordered that Jodi could sell her home but has to place $100,000 in escrow to satisfy that restitution. So he wanted her to be on the hook for the help that these children need. But also B, now that the criminal case is over and Jodi has admitted guilt, it would be much easier to prove liability in a civil case. That's my opinion. But let's get into the complaint. So after laying out the parties and the court's jurisdiction over this, the complaint lays out the facts of the case. And it says, quote, while plaintiff was residing in Utah County, beginning on or about May 22nd, 2023, defendant, in collaboration with plaintiff's then wife, Ruby Franke, also mother of these 4 children, moved the 4 minor children to defendant's home in Ivins, Utah. So all 4 children were there. Remember, this was during their parents' separation. Quote, neither defendant nor Ruby Franke advised plaintiff of the removal of the children from the family home in Springville, Utah, to defendant's home in Ivins, Utah. Again, according to Kevin, he had no idea what was happening with Franke and his kids at this time. Then Kevin Franke incorporates into this complaint almost verbatim the disturbing details of abuse that were laid out in Ruby and Jodi's plea agreements about these 2 youngest children. By the way, we're talking about EF and RF. EF was 9 years old, and RF, this abuse occurred over the span of when he was 11 to 12. So these 2 youngest children were confined to the home. The women inflicted serious physical injuries on the children. There was torture. There was physical labor. There was standing out in the heat, denial of food and water, isolation. Franke's son was tied up. They were told that they were evil, that they had to repent. The kids were emaciated. They suffered severe wounds. Honestly, I don't even want to go into it any further. We have already done that so many times, but you get the idea. And from there, the complaint goes on to say how when Ruby's son was finally able to escape and run to that neighbor's home, this son, RF, quote, requested from the neighbor food, water, and that law enforcement be called so he could be taken to jail. This latter request was because he had been so indoctrinated by defendant that if he escaped, he would go to jail. Yeah, that is a theme in these abuse cases. And we've talked about it before, that the victims are made to believe that they are the ones who did something wrong. The complaint goes on to say, quote, instead of jail, however, of course, he was cared for by first responders and eventually admitted to the hospital for severe malnourishment, his body being emaciated, and for treatment of his many and serious wounds and injuries. Then the complaint talks about EF, Ruby's young daughter, and describes something that we saw on body cam video. Quote, after searching defendant's home, EF was eventually located in a closet of the home sitting on the floor. First responders and law enforcement found her in an emaciated, food-deprived condition, and although conscious, was so emotionally traumatized and afraid that she would not communicate with them. Only after hours of reassuring her safety, calming her fears, and offering her food, she ate an entire pizza and part of another, were they able to coax her out of the closet so she could be taken to the hospital to treat her injuries, malnourishment, and emotional state. Yeah, that was some of the most harrowing footage that we saw. And the officer initially, by the way, believed that EF was a boy because her hair was so short. There was evidence to suggest from Ruby's journal entries that she cut her daughter's hair as a form of punishment. We cover a lot of lawsuits here on Sidebar, like this one from Kevin Franke. And that actually brings me to Morgan & Morgan, the largest injury law firm in America and our proud sponsor. So if you should get hurt, I can't emphasize this enough. It is so vital that you understand your legal rights and whether you're entitled to compensation, because that injury could be worth millions of dollars. And Morgan & Morgan is a firm that's not afraid to take on big insurance companies that sometimes lowball offers. No, Morgan & Morgan will take a case to trial if it's necessary. And you know what? They win big. Verdicts of $12 million in Florida, $26 million in Philadelphia, $6.8 million in New York. All of these, by the way, significantly higher than the highest insurance offers in these cases. And since Morgan & Morgan is so client-focused, they want to make this process as easy for you as possible. That's why they've completely modernized it so it can all be done from your smartphone, from submitting your claim to signing documents, to uploading materials, to talking to your legal team, seeing if you have a case. Only takes a few minutes. So if you're injured, you can start by easily submitting a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar, or you can dial pound law, that's pound 529 on your phone. The complaint explains that the Department of Child and Family Services took custody of the kids, quote, in order to address professionally the emotional and psychological condition of the children, which had been so seriously and adversely manipulated and indoctrinated. The children are residing in separate homes while in state's custody. Didn't know that they're separated. That is very, very sad to think about, that they're not together. And this part is especially tough. Quote, the children's personalities, emotions, and psyches were so damaged and altered that it was beyond father's capability to restore them without professional intervention of state's resources through the juvenile court. This through a rehabilitation and restorative process directed and prescribed by the professionals treating the children. In order to restore his children to his care in their family home, meaning how he's going to get back custody. Father himself has complied with the court process and has affirmatively sought his own regimen of professional therapy in order to coordinate not only with the children's treatment providers, but to gain an understanding of his children's conditions and needs and how to best facilitate the restoration of all of his children back to their former status as happy and healthy individuals and of a happy and intact family in their family home. In other words, it will take a lot of work for both Kevin and the kids to get back to themselves and a path of recovery after all of this. And it seems like he is doing everything the court is asking him to do, including seeking help himself. The complaint then says, quote, the intentional and or negligent acts of the defendant have completely damaged and altered for the worse Kevin's marriage, the children's mother is in prison, all of his children's individual psyches, personalities, and behaviors, essentially dismantling, exploding his family and his personal life. And Kevin goes on to state that the consequence of what Jodi did was foreseeable. Foreseeability is such a major element in these kinds of civil suits. You knew this would happen, or you should have known this would happen. Which brings me to the actual claims or causes of action in the lawsuit. Under what theories is he suing? Okay, cause of action number one, intentional infliction of emotional distress. This is a very broad kind of legal claim. And what he's arguing here is that Jodi engaged in, quote, severe and intolerable conduct and acted with, quote, reckless disregard of the probability of causing emotional distress to Kevin and the kids. So you don't have to show that Jodi intended to cause Kevin or the kids emotional distress. Not that she necessarily wanted that to occur, but that she recklessly disregarded the chances of Kevin and the kids suffering emotional distress because of what she did. And he says he did, in fact, suffer emotional distress. And as a direct and proximate result of defendant's wrongful actions and omissions, Kevin has suffered past and future economic, non-economic damages, pain and suffering, emotional distress, loss of quality of life, and loss of enjoyment of life. So damages, by the way, that's money. That's what you should be compensated. And the causation element, the direct and proximate result, that's causation. What Jodi did caused Kevin's harm. And this is what that harm is, and this is what he lost. All essential in a civil claim. Cause of action number two. This is an alternative take. It is negligent infliction of emotional distress. So negligence is about reasonableness. And here it's that Jodi engaged in conduct that she should have known would create an unreasonable risk of causing emotional distress to Kevin. It's not about intent. Again, causation's there, that as a result of what she did, he suffered harm. And that same idea leads into the third and final claim or cause of action listed in this lawsuit, negligence. So Jodi had a legal duty with respect to Kevin and the kids to act reasonably under the circumstances, and she breached that duty of care. She breached it, and that caused Kevin harm. And like the other counts, this caused economic, non-economic damages, pain, suffering, emotional distress, loss of quality of life, and loss of enjoyment of life. Now, there is another interesting component towards the end of this lawsuit that I want to call out, and it says, pursuant to the Utah Rules of Civil Procedure 8A, that, by the way, sets out what you have to lay out in a complaint to make a legal claim against another. So it's like requirements you have to put in a pleading in a complaint. So it goes on to say, so pursuant to 8A and 26C3, this matter falls under Tier 3 and should be permitted discovery pursuant to Tier 3. So I actually looked this up. Under Utah law, my understanding is what this means is that lawsuits that are claiming $300,000 or more in damages, which Kevin seems to be claiming here, you will be granted Tier 3 discovery. So there is a chart by tiers in Utah, and it lays out the hours needed for depositions, the days to complete discovery, how many requests you get for evidence, and so forth. Well, Tier 3 grants you more time and grants you more requests, basically. So it's advantageous for Kevin to be Tier 3. Now, it's hard to say what Jodi will do with this lawsuit, how she will respond to this lawsuit. I imagine that there is more money that Kevin believes Jodi has here. Otherwise, why would you sue? After all, it was reported that her house that she was permitted to sell was worth over $5 million. So there seems to be a legal avenue to get the money that he believes he and the kids are entitled to. We will, of course, continue to monitor this lawsuit and any developments in the Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt saga. That's all we have for you here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.